During dinner, my best friend said she was pregnant and that the father is my husband. She expected me to break down crying in front of my elite in-laws. But then I revealed a medical secret that turned her perfect trap into a nightmare. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. I am Jada. I am 34 years old. I am a senior forensic accountant. My job is to look at numbers and find the lies. I look at balance sheets and find the hidden truths. I look at people and find the rot beneath the surface. My husband Marcus is 36. He is a luxury real estate developer here in the heart of Atlanta. We were celebrating our 7th wedding anniversary in a private dining room at one of the most exclusive restaurants in Buckhead. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the mahogany table. Waiters moved silently, pouring expensive champagne. It was the picture of Black excellence. It was the picture of high society. It was a complete and utter lie. Sitting across from us was Vivian. Vivian is 62 years old and a pillar of Atlanta high society. She is the mother of Marcus. She judges everyone by their church status, their bank accounts, and their sorority legacy. Beside her sat my sister-in-law Tasha, who is 32, and her husband Liam. Liam is 35, a white investment consultant who plays the role of the perfect polite family man. And then there was Keisha. Keisha is 34, my supposed best friend, and a cutthroat real estate agent who frequently works with Marcus. The dinner was proceeding as it always did. Vivian was making subtle jabs at my working-class background. She reminded the table that I grew up on the south side of town. She reminded the table that I worked my way through college. She reminded the table that I did not come from money. I did not react. I never reacted. I just sat there sipping my sparkling water, watching the performance unfold. I watched them smile. I watched them laugh. I watched them pretend. Then Keisha stood up. She tapped her crystal champagne glass with a silver spoon. The clear, ringing sound cut through the soft jazz playing in the background. I thought she was going to offer a toast to our 7 years of marriage. Instead, she looked directly at me with a smirk that she did not even try to hide. Jada, I am sorry. Her voice was loud enough for the entire private room to hear. But I am 12 weeks pregnant, and Marcus is the father. The silence in the room was absolute. The waiters stopped moving. Tasha dropped her fork. Liam froze with a dinner roll halfway to his mouth. I looked at Marcus expecting to see shock or panic. Instead, he sat back in his custom-tailored suit, crossing his arms, looking defiant. He did not deny it. He did not apologize. He just watched me, waiting for my reaction. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to shatter. They wanted me to cry and beg for an explanation. They wanted me to be the discarded wife weeping over her ruined marriage. Vivian did not miss a beat. She leaned across the table, her eyes flashing with cold triumph. Do not look at my son like that, Jada. You have given him 7 years of empty promises and a barren womb. This family needs an heir, and Keisha stepped up to do what a real woman should do. You have no one to blame but yourself. Her words were meant to be the final blow. They were meant to crush my spirit and force me to submit to their twisted family dynamic. But I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not run out of the room. I reached for my linen napkin and calmly wiped my mouth. I picked up my designer clutch from the empty chair beside me. I opened the gold clasp and pulled out a thick, sealed medical file. I tossed it across the table. It landed directly on the plate in front of Vivian, sliding into her expensive truffle risotto. It is a medical miracle, Keisha. I said, my voice perfectly steady and deadly calm. You managed to get pregnant by a man who was left completely and irreversibly sterile from a severe bout of mumps at age 14. The color drained from the face of Marcus. His defiant posture vanished, replaced by wide-eyed terror. Vivian stared at the medical file as if it were a venomous snake. It is funny, Vivian. I continued, leaning forward so they could hear every single syllable clearly. You never mentioned the childhood medical records of your son to me. You never mentioned that your precious heir was shooting blanks for the last 2 decades. You let me endure years of invasive fertility treatments. You let me endure years of hormone injections. You let me endure years of crying in hospital parking lots. You let me endure years of your cruel comments about my body, all while you knew your son was the reason we could not conceive. Keisha was the one who held my hand when the pregnancy tests came back negative. Keisha was the one who told me to keep hoping. Keisha was the one who listened to my deepest fears. And all along, she was waiting for her moment to strike. She wanted my life. She wanted my status. She wanted my husband. I turned my gaze slowly to Keisha, who was now trembling visibly. Her hands were clutching the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. She looked completely terrified. She looked completely exposed. She looked completely ruined. So I asked, letting a soft smile touch my lips, "Whose baby is really in that belly?" Marcus slammed his fist on the mahogany table. The crystal glasses rattled and a bottle of expensive red wine tipped over, spilling across the white linen tablecloth like fresh blood. He was furious. He was panicking. He was backed into a corner and fighting for his life. "You are lying," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You are a bitter, dried-up accountant who forged these documents to save face. You cannot stand the fact that Keisha is giving me what you never could." Hein denied the medical records. He denied his own biology. He denied reality itself just to maintain his facade in front of his mother. But I am a forensic accountant. I do not deal in feelings. I do not deal in assumptions. I do not deal in blind faith. I deal in hard, undeniable facts. I ignored his outburst completely. I reached back into my clutch and pulled out my tablet. I tapped the screen a few times and turned the brightness all the way up. I slid the device across the table toward Vivian and Marcus. The screen displayed crystal clear, high-resolution security footage. It was from the camera I had secretly installed in the hallway outside the luxury downtown condo belonging to Keisha. The same condo I had helped her secure a mortgage for just last year. The video showed a very distinct, very recognizable car pulling into her private parking spot. "The man visiting your bed every Tuesday and Thursday is not my husband, Keisha," I said, letting my voice carry across the silent dining room. "It is the silver Aston Martin belonging to Liam." The camera on the tablet panned over to Liam, the polished, respectable white brother-in-law who always preached about family values at Sunday dinners. He began choking violently on his drink. He coughed and sputtered, his face turning a bright, unnatural shade of red. He grabbed his napkin, trying to hide his panicked expression, but it was too late. The truth was out. Hai had lied to his wife. He had lied to his family. He had lied to everyone in his life. Beside him, Tasha sat frozen. She stared at the screen, watching her husband step out of the car and use a key to unlock the front door of Keisha. The video showed them kissing passionately in the hallway before disappearing inside. The perfect, privileged illusion of Tasha shattered in real time. Then the screaming began. Tasha let out a sound that was half sob and half roar. She lunged across the table, her hands outstretched, clawing wildly at the face of Keisha. Plates crashed to the floor. Silverware scattered everywhere. Keisha shrieked and tried to scramble backward, but her chair tipped over, sending her crashing to the carpet. Tasha was relentless. She grabbed a handful of hair and yanked hard, screaming curses at her best friend and her husband. Liam jumped up and tried to pull his wife away from his pregnant mistress, but Tasha turned her rage on him, slapping him across the face with a resounding crack. The elite, sophisticated dinner party had devolved into absolute, unchecked chaos. Waiters rushed into the room, trying to separate them. The restaurant manager was yelling for security. Vivian was hyperventilating, clutching her chest and calling out for Marcus to do something. Marcus saw the situation spiraling out of his control. He realized his entire family was imploding right in front of him. He needed a scapegoat. He needed someone to blame for the destruction of his perfect image. He turned his absolute rage back on me. "Enough!" Marcus roared, grabbing my arm. His grip was bruising, but I did not flinch. "You are psychotic, Jada. You planned this whole thing to ruin my family. You are a monster. I want you to go back to the house, pack your cheap bags, and get out tonight. I want you gone before I call the police. You are leaving with nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing at all." I looked down at his hand, gripping my arm. Then I looked up into his desperate, angry eyes. I stood up, smoothing the front of my designer dress. I was completely unbothered by his threats. I was completely unshaken by his anger. I was completely unfazed by his demands. I picked up my tablet from the table and placed it carefully back into my clutch. "Your house?" I asked, tilting my head slightly to the side as I looked at the man I had married 7 years ago. "Are you absolutely sure about that, Marcus?" I did not wait for his answer. I turned on my heel and walked out of the private dining room, leaving the shattered remains of my marriage on the floor behind me. The valet brought my car around. I handed him $100 bill and drove straight to our sprawling estate in Buckhead. I knew exactly what Marcus would do. Men like him always follow the same predictable patterns when their egos are bruised. They resort to destruction. By the time I pulled through the wrought iron gates of our driveway, my prediction was proven correct. Marcus had beaten me there. He was standing on the pristine cobblestone driveway, furiously hurling my custom-tailored suits out the front door. Silk blouses and cashmere slacks were scattered across the manicured lawn. He grabbed a pair of my designer heels and threw them at the hood of my car as I parked. "You have lost your mind, Jada," he screamed, his face twisted with rage. "I told you to get out. You do not belong here anymore. You are trespassing on my property. Get your garbage and leave before I call the cops and have you dragged out in handcuffs." I stepped out of my car and looked at the silk suit lying in the dirt. It was a $1,000 suit, but I felt absolutely nothing. "You want to call the police, Marcus?" I asked, pulling my phone from my clutch. "Let me save you the trouble." I dialed 911 and put the phone to my ear. "Yes, I need officers at my residence immediately. I have a hostile individual destroying property and refusing to leave." I gave the dispatcher the address and ended the call. Marcus laughed. It was a harsh, grating sound. "You really are crazy. The deed is in my name. The mortgage is paid by my company. The police are going to drag you away and I'm going to watch them do it. You are a nobody from the South Side. I made you. I gave you this life." We stood in the driveway waiting. The flashing blue lights of 2 patrol cars cut through the darkness of the affluent neighborhood less than 5 minutes later. 2 officers stepped out of their vehicles looking tense and ready for a domestic dispute. Marcus immediately switched into his charming real estate developer persona. He smoothed his suit jacket and walked toward the officers with an easy, confident stride. "Officers, thank you for coming," Marcus said, using his most professional tone. "I am Marcus, the owner of this property. My wife and I are separating tonight. She is refusing to leave and she is becoming hysterical. I just need her escorted off my premises so we can handle this through our divorce attorneys tomorrow." The older officer turned to me. "Ma'am, is this true? Do you need to gather your belongings?" I smiled politely at the officer. "Actually, officer, this is not a domestic dispute over a shared marital home. This is a trespassing issue. The man standing in front of you is a tenant who has violated his lease agreement and is currently vandalizing property owned by my corporation. I would like him removed immediately." Marcus scoffed, shaking his head. "She is delusional. Look at her. She is a bitter accountant trying to steal my house." I reached into the leather briefcase I had retrieved from my back seat. I did not bring a divorce lawyer to this fight. I brought receipts. I handed a thick stack of notarized documents to the older officer. "Marcus, did you forget who structured the shell companies to hide your tax evasion for the last 5 years? Did you forget who built the financial fortress that kept the government out of your bank accounts?" Marcus stopped smiling. He took a step toward me, but the younger officer put a hand on his chest to stop him. I turned back to the officers. "You will see right there on page 2, officer. This estate, the 3 luxury vehicles parked in that garage, and 80% of his luxury real estate development firm are legally owned by a holding corporation called Vanguard Holdings, LLC. Marcus created this structure to avoid paying federal taxes and to shield his assets from potential lawsuits. It was a very clever strategy." The officer shined his flashlight on the documents, flipping through the pages. "But there is one minor detail Marcus failed to read when he signed those papers." I continued, my voice echoing in the quiet night air. "I am the sole managing member and registered agent of Vanguard Holdings, LLC. Marcus holds 0 equity in the holding company. He transferred ownership of everything to the corporation to hide his money. Legally speaking, this house belongs to the LLC. The cars belong to the LLC. The business belongs to the LLC. Marcus is simply a tenant and an employee. And as the sole managing director, I am officially terminating his employment and evicting him from my property. The older officer finished reading the corporate registry and the property deed. He looked up at Marcus. Sir, her name is the only one on these ownership documents. Legally, she has the right to ask you to leave the premises. Marcus looked like he had been struck by lightning. He lunged toward the officer. Let me see those papers. That is impossible. I am the CEO. I built that company. She is just the accountant who filed the paperwork. She tricked me. The younger officer unclipped his handcuffs and stepped firmly in front of Marcus. Sir, step back right now. The paperwork is clear. You are not the legal owner of this property. You need to vacate the premises immediately, or you will be arrested for trespassing and vandalism. I stood tall on the driveway, looking at the man who had betrayed me. You can leave the cars, Marcus. The LLC owns those too. You might want to call an Uber. Marcus was breathing heavily, his chest heaving with panic and fury. The realization of his total financial ruin was washing over him. He had handed me the keys to his entire empire to save a few bucks on taxes, and I had locked him out. He pulled his phone from his pocket with shaking hands and dialed a number. He put it on speakerphone. Mom! Marcus yelled into the phone the moment Vivian answered. You need to get over here right now. Jada is trying to steal my house. She brought the police. She forged documents. You need to call the police chief. You need to fix this. The voice of Vivian crackled through the speakerphone, sharp and dripping with absolute venom. I heard the entire commotion, Marcus. I am already making calls. Do not panic. Put that ungrateful little street trash on the phone. I stepped closer to the phone. I am right here, Vivian. You listen to me and you listen closely. Vivian hissed, her voice trembling with dark, furious energy. You think you are clever because you shuffled some papers around. You think you can walk into Buckhead and steal from my family. You are nothing. You do not play in our league. I sit on the board of every major financial institution in Atlanta. I have the ear of every senior partner at your accounting firm. By the time the sun comes up tomorrow, I am going to have you suspended. I am going to destroy your career. I am going to leverage every single high society connection I have in this city to crush you into dust. You are going to be begging on the streets when I am done with you. I did not blink. I did not waver. I just smiled into the phone, knowing exactly what was coming next. The sun had barely risen over the Atlanta skyline when my cell phone vibrated on the marble kitchen counter. It was an incoming call from the managing partner at my accounting firm. He sounded deeply uncomfortable. Jada, we have received some troubling complaints regarding your personal conduct. The board is placing you on immediate administrative leave pending a full character investigation. I already knew Vivian had spent the entire night calling every country club member and bank executive in her network. I hung up the phone. It rang again instantly. It was Vivian. I answered the call and put it on speaker. Good morning, Vivian. You do not play in our league, Jada. Vivian gloated, her voice dripping with satisfaction. I told you I would crush you. Your little calculator job is gone. You are going to sign those assets back to my son today, and I will let you go back to counting pennies for a living. I poured myself a cup of dark roast coffee. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the pristine lawn where Marcus had thrown a temper tantrum just hours earlier. You really think this is about a job, Vivian? I asked, taking a slow sip of my coffee. Do you actually know why Marcus stayed married to me for 7 years? Do you think it was for love? It was not. Your golden child needed a senior forensic accountant to clean up his dirty money. He needed someone smart enough to build a maze of holding companies so the federal government would not seize his business. Vivian scoffed loudly through the phone. You are lying. My son is a brilliant developer. He is a pillar of the community. He is a fraud, Vivian. I corrected her, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm. He builds nothing, and he is not the only one. By the way, Vivian, have you checked your offshore accounts recently? There was a sudden pause on the arrogant bravado in the voice of Vivian faltered for just a second. What are you talking about? I am talking about the $2 million retirement fund you gave Marcus and Liam last year, I said. You gave them your life savings to invest in those commercial properties in Midtown. You thought you were securing your legacy. You might want to log into your banking portal, Vivian. You might want to see exactly what your brilliant son and your polished son-in-law have done with your money. I heard the frantic clicking of a keyboard through the speakerphone. I knew exactly what Vivian was doing. She was logging into the offshore accounts she kept hidden from the church board and her high society friends. I knew her passwords. I knew her routing numbers. I knew everything because I was the one who had audited them when Marcus begged me to fix his books. I waited in absolute silence as the reality of her situation loaded on her computer screen. A sharp gasp echoed through the phone. It was the sound of a proud, arrogant woman having the breath knocked out of her lungs. The accounts were empty. Every single penny of her $2 million legacy had been drained. "Where is my money?" Vivian screamed, her voice cracking with pure panic. "Where is my money, Jada?" "I did not take it, Vivian," I replied smoothly. "Marcus drained it to pay off the interest on his bad loans. Liam drained the rest to cover his massive underground gambling debts. They stole from you to keep their fake lives afloat. They bled you dry. I was the only thing keeping them out of federal prison. And you just got me suspended." I hung up the phone. I did not need to hear the rest. I already knew what was happening inside that opulent mansion across town. Vivian was turning her absolute wrath on her own flesh and blood. The tight-knit family image was tearing itself apart. I could easily picture Vivian marching through her grand hallways screaming at Marcus for bankrupting her. I could picture her throwing expensive vases at his head. I could picture Tasha waking up to the sound of her mother attacking her husband. The perfect Atlanta dynasty was eating itself alive from the inside out. They had spent years looking down on my working-class roots, but they were the ones swimming in dirt. They had built their entire identity on the illusion of wealth. Vivian attended every charity gala and hosted every church fundraiser, acting like royalty. She looked down on anyone who could not trace their lineage back to the right families. Now she was completely broke. Her golden son had robbed her blind. Her respectable son-in-law had gambled away her future. They were nothing but sophisticated thieves wearing tailored suits. I stood in the massive, quiet estate that I now completely controlled. I spent the afternoon reviewing more financial documents, securing my next moves. I was untouchable. I had the evidence. I had the power. Suddenly, frantic, desperate pounding echoed through the foyer. Someone was at my solid oak front door. The doorbell rang continuously, buzzing loud like an alarm. Someone was out there in the freezing rain, refusing to leave. I walked through the grand hallway. The pounding grew louder and more frantic. I reached the door and checked the security monitor mounted on the wall. The high-definition camera showed a woman standing on my porch. She was completely drenched. Her expensive silk blouse was clinging to her shivering frame. Her designer makeup was running down her face in dark, muddy streaks. She looked truly pathetic. She looked destroyed. It was Keisha, my former best friend. The woman who had proudly announced she was pregnant with the baby of my husband just 24 hours ago. She was banging her fists against my door, crying hysterically into the camera. She had absolutely nowhere else to go right now. I pressed the intercom button on the wall panel. My voice echoed through the speaker, cutting through the sound of the freezing Atlanta rain. "Go to the side garage entrance, Keisha. I am not letting you ruin my hardwood floors." I walked through the mudroom and unlocked the heavy steel door leading to the expansive 6-car garage. I did not turn on the main overhead lights. I only flicked on a dim security bulb. The side door slowly creaked open. Keisha stepped inside, shivering violently. The glamorous, cutthroat real estate agent who had mocked me at the dinner table 24 hours ago was completely gone. In her place stood a broken, desperate woman. A dark purple bruise was swelling across her left cheekbone, a souvenir from the vicious right hook Tasha had delivered at the restaurant. Her designer silk blouse was torn at the collar and soaked with muddy water. She took a step toward the inner door, but I held my hand up flat and firm. "You stay exactly right there," I commanded. "You do not get to cross the threshold of my home. You stand on the concrete." Keisha wrapped her arms around her stomach, shaking uncontrollably. "Jada, please, you have to let me in," she sobbed, her voice cracking. Liam threw me out of his car on the side of the highway. He left me in the rain. He told me he was going back to Tasha to save his marriage and his trust fund. He told me I was on my own. He said the baby was my problem now. And Marcus? I asked, crossing my arms over my chest. I assume your brilliant baby daddy abandoned you too. Keisha let out a bitter, pathetic laugh. Marcus fired me. He locked me out of the brokerage portal before the sun even came up. He sent a mass email to every major real estate firm in Buckhead and Midtown saying I embezzled client funds. He completely blacklisted me. I cannot even get a job showing cheap apartments in the suburbs right now. I have absolutely nothing, Jada. My bank accounts are frozen. My credit cards are declining. Please, we grew up together on the South Side. We are sisters. Black women need to protect each other when these men try to destroy us. I stared at her, feeling a profound sense of disgust. You really have the nerve to play the sisterhood card with me tonight. I asked, my tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. You played the sisterhood card while you were smiling in my face at Sunday brunches. You played the sisterhood card while you were helping me pick out fertility clinic brochures. You played the sisterhood card while you were slipping into a hotel room with the husband of my sister-in-law. You do not know the meaning of the word sister. Keisha dropped to her knees on the cold, hard concrete. She was crying hysterically now. I know I was wrong. I know I was terrible. But I can help you, Jada. I can give you exactly what you need to put both of them in federal prison for the rest of their miserable lives. She reached into her soaked designer handbag and pulled out a small black external hard drive. She held it up toward me like an offering to a queen. What is that? I asked, keeping my distance. It is the raw, unedited ledger. Keisha gasped, wiping rain and mascara from her eyes. Marcus and Liam thought they were so smart hiding their tracks, but they are lazy. They made me handle the physical transfers. This drive contains every single fraudulent wire receipt. It contains the fake invoices Liam generated to justify moving cash from the development projects into his offshore gambling accounts. It contains the emails where Marcus explicitly ordered me to forge signatures on the loan applications. It is the smoking gun, Jada. With this, you can prove they orchestrated the entire syndicate. I looked at the small black device resting in her shaking palm. This was the missing puzzle piece. I had the corporate tax returns and the holding company structures, but this drive contained the actual raw communication and the direct evidence of their criminal intent. I stepped forward and snatched the hard drive from her hand. Keisha let out a massive sigh of relief. She grabbed the doorframe and started to pull herself up from the concrete floor. Thank you, Jada, she whispered, wiping her face. I promise I will not take up much space. I just need a hot shower and a place to sleep until I can figure out my next move. I took a step back into the warm, illuminated mudroom. I looked down at the woman who had tried to destroy my life and steal my husband. I am glad you brought me this drive, Keisha. I said, my voice devoid of any warmth or sympathy. But you seem to be confused about our arrangement. I am not offering you a guest room. I am not offering you a hot shower. I am not offering you a single ounce of grace. The expression of relief on the face of Keisha instantly morphed back into pure panic. But I gave you the evidence, she pleaded, stepping toward the door. I helped you. You slept with my husband to cover up the fact that you were sleeping with the husband of Tasha. I stated coldly, shutting down her pathetic attempt at redemption. You let them use you because you wanted the luxury cars and the expensive dinners. You are not a victim, Keisha. You are an accomplice. I grabbed the heavy steel door. You can walk back out into the rain, or I can call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. The choice is yours. Jada, no, please. Keisha screamed, reaching for the door. I slammed the heavy steel door directly in her face. The heavy deadbolt clicked perfectly into place, echoing through the quiet house. I walked straight to my home office and plugged the hard drive into my encrypted laptop. The files instantly populated on my screen. It was an absolute goldmine of federal crimes. Every dirty secret Marcus and Liam had ever buried was sitting right in front of me in high resolution. But across town, a different kind of storm was brewing. Marcus and Liam had just discovered the hard drive was missing from the safe inside the brokerage office. They knew immediately what Keisha had done. They knew she had flipped and run straight to the only person smart enough to decode the ledger. Panic turned into a ruthless strategy. They realized they were out of time and out of options. They pooled whatever clean cash they had left and hired the most aggressive, high-profile criminal defense attorney in the state of Georgia. They sat in a dark mahogany boardroom, making a desperate and vicious plan to save themselves. They knew they could not erase the financial crimes, so they decided to reassign the blame entirely. Their new legal strategy was simple and deadly. They were going to go to the federal authorities first. They were going to point the finger directly at me. They planned to frame me as the absolute mastermind behind the entire money laundering syndicate. After all, my name was the only one officially registered on the holding companies and the LLCs. They were going to tell the FBI that I manipulated them. They were preparing to strike back with everything they had. The summons arrived by courier. The very next morning, commanding my presence at a high-stakes divorce mediation. The location was a sleek glass high-rise in downtown Atlanta. I walked into the expansive conference room and found Marcus already seated at the massive mahogany table. He wore a bespoke navy suit looking every bit the untouchable real estate king he pretended to be. Beside him sat his new attorney, a man famous in Georgia for destroying spouses in high-asset divorces. They looked incredibly smug. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought their new strategy of blaming me for the money laundering would force me to surrender everything. "Take a seat, Jada," Marcus commanded, pointing to the leather chair across from him. "We are going to make this quick so I can get back to running my empire." I sat down, placing my leather briefcase on the floor next to my feet. I crossed my legs and looked directly at the high-priced attorney. The lawyer cleared his throat and slid a thick legal document across the polished table. He folded his hands and looked at me with absolute condescension. "My client is offering you a very generous exit strategy, Jada. You are going to sign over all the holding companies and the LLCs back to Marcus today. You are also going to sign a strict non-disclosure agreement, barring you from ever discussing his business practices. In exchange, my client will not hand over this flash drive to the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The lawyer patted a small silver flash drive sitting next to the contract. He leaned forward, trying to look intimidating. "We know you are the registered agent on all the corporate accounts. We have drafted a narrative backed by fabricated digital evidence that paints you as the sole mastermind behind a massive embezzlement scheme. If you do not sign this divorce settlement right now, we will send this drive to the federal authorities. You will face decades in a federal penitentiary," while Marcus walks away as the innocent victim of a manipulative wife. Marcus laughed, leaning back in his chair. "You really thought you could outsmart me?" he sneered. "You thought a girl from the working-class South Side could steal the wealth of my family. My mother warned me about you from day one. You are nothing without my name. You sign those papers right now and walk away with nothing, or I am going to watch the feds put you in a cage." I looked at the contract. I looked at the flash drive. Then I looked at Marcus. I did not cry. I did not beg. I did not panic. I leaned my head back and I laughed. It was not a quiet chuckle. It was a loud, genuine, echoing laugh that filled the entire conference room. Marcus slammed his hand on the table, his face flushing with anger. "What is so funny? I am about to ruin your life." I stopped laughing and sat forward, resting my elbows on the mahogany table. My eyes locked onto his expensive defense attorney. "You brought a divorce lawyer to a federal crime fight." I stated, my voice deadly calm and perfectly clear. I reached down and picked up my briefcase. I unlocked the metal clasps and pulled out a massive 500-page bound document. It was thick, heavy, and marked with official government seals. I dropped it directly onto the center of the table with a loud, resounding thud. The lawyer jumped slightly in his seat. "I am a senior forensic accountant." I continued, staring the lawyer right in the eyes. "I do not play games with flash drives and fake narratives. 6 months ago, I recognized exactly what Marcus and his brother-in-law Liam were doing with those construction loans. I knew they were laundering money, so I did what any responsible financial professional would do. I submitted this entire portfolio to the Internal Revenue Service under the federal whistleblower program." Marcus turned pale. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I tapped the heavy document. "Every fraudulent wire transfer is in there. Every fake invoice Liam generated is in there. Every offshore account your mother Vivian used to hide your stolen funds is documented, tracked, and verified by federal agents. I handed them the entire syndicate on a silver platter 6 months before you even knew I was angry. I have been working as a confidential informant for the federal government this entire time. The lawyer reached out with a shaking hand and opened the first page of the binder. He saw the official IRS tracking numbers. He saw the stamps from the Department of Justice. He saw the undeniable proof of a massive federal investigation already in progress. Because I provided the evidence proactively, I added, leaning back in my chair. The government granted me total and complete federal immunity. I cannot be prosecuted for any of the financial crimes attached to those LLCs. I am legally protected. You, on the other hand, Marcus, are facing 20 years in federal prison. And this little extortion attempt you just tried to pull with your lawyer, I made sure my wire was recording the entire conversation. The attorney turned completely white. A lawyer cannot knowingly participate in federal extortion or suborn perjury without losing his license and facing prison time himself. He realized instantly that Marcus had lied to him and dragged him into a massive federal trap. The attorney slammed the binder shut. He shoved his chair back so violently it crashed into the glass wall behind him. He grabbed his briefcase and began shoving his papers inside with frantic, trembling hands. "What are you doing?" Marcus yelled, grabbing the arm of his lawyer. "You work for me. You have to fix this. I am officially withdrawing as your legal counsel effective immediately." The lawyer stammered, ripping his arm out of the grip of Marcus. "Do not call my office. Do not contact me. You lied to me about a federal investigation. You are completely on your own." The lawyer practically ran out of the conference room, leaving the heavy glass door swinging shut behind him. The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus sat frozen in his chair, staring at the 500-page document that represented the absolute end of his life. His arrogance was completely gone. His wealth was gone. His freedom was gone. He pulled out his phone with violently shaking hands and desperately texted Liam. Across town in a luxury high-rise apartment, the phone of Liam vibrated on the kitchen counter. Liam picked it up and read the panicked message from Marcus. The text simply said, "She went to the IRS, the feds are coming for us." Liam dropped his coffee mug. It shattered on the marble floor. He knew exactly what that meant. The game was over. The money was gone. Federal agents were likely already securing arrest warrants. Liam did not call his wife Tasha. He did not call his pregnant mistress Keisha. He stared at his phone for exactly 2 seconds before making a singular, selfish decision. He had to run. He had to get out of Atlanta before the authorities froze his passport. Liam ran toward his master bedroom to pack a bag, preparing to leave everyone behind to save himself. He sprinted down the hallway of his luxury penthouse, tearing off his tailored tie and throwing it onto the marble kitchen island. His heart was hammering against his ribs. Liam knew his privilege would not save him from a federal indictment. He tore through the master closet, ripping custom suits off their hangers. He dropped to his knees and pried up the loose floorboard hidden beneath a heavy Persian rug. He punched a frantic sequence of numbers into the concealed digital safe. The heavy steel door popped open. Liam pulled out a thick black canvas duffel bag. Inside, stacks of crisp $100 bills stared back at him, right next to a flawless Canadian passport bearing a fake name. He grabbed his laptop from the desk and logged into the secure joint banking portal he shared with his wife. Tasha had just received a massive quarterly trust fund disbursement from Vivian. Liam did not hesitate. "I initiated an immediate wire transfer, draining the entire account down to zero." He routed the stolen funds through shell companies, ending in an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. He closed the laptop, shoved it into the duffel bag, and walked out of the apartment without leaving a note. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Keisha begging for money for her prenatal appointments. He deleted the message. His phone buzzed again. It was a call from Tasha. He blocked her number. He rode the elevator down to the underground garage, climbed into his silver Aston Martin, and sped wildly toward Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. His mistress and his wife were no longer his concern. His only goal was surviving the night. Tasha returned to the penthouse an hour later. She hummed a cheerful tune, carrying shopping bags filled with dresses for the gala. She dropped the bags onto the kitchen island and called out for her husband. Silence answered her. She noticed his discarded tie lying on the counter and frowned. She walked down the long corridor and stepped into the master bedroom. Tasha froze in her tracks. The massive walk-in closet looked like a violent hurricane had ripped right through it. Expensive clothes and empty hangers littered the floor in chaotic piles. The hidden floorboard safe stood wide open, stripped bare. Tasha felt the blood drain from her face. A cold, terrifying knot formed in the pit of her stomach. She pulled out her smartphone and opened her mobile banking application to check their joint account. The screen loaded, displaying a reality. The balance read $0.00. Her quarterly trust fund disbursement was gone. The savings accounts meant for their two young children were gone. The emergency funds were gone. The illusion of her perfect, polished, devoted white husband vanished in a single terrifying instant. Her knees buckled beneath her, and she collapsed heavily onto the edge of the mattress. She gasped for air as a panic attack gripped her chest. Jada had been telling the truth this entire time. The shocking medical records revealing the infertility of Marcus were real. The security footage showing Liam sneaking into the luxury condo of Keisha was real. The money laundering accusations were real. Tasha picked up her phone with a shaking hand and dialed the only person in Atlanta she thought possessed enough power to fix this nightmare. Vivian answered her cell phone. She stood in the grand ballroom of a luxury hotel in Buckhead, barking orders at event planners. "Mom, Liam is gone." Tasha screamed into the receiver, tears streaming down her ruined makeup. "He emptied my accounts. He took everything we had." Jada was telling the truth at the restaurant. "The federal agents are coming for all of us." Vivian gripped her smartphone so tightly. She looked around the opulent ballroom. Waiters were rushing to set up crystal centerpieces. The elite of Atlanta were about to arrive in their finest gowns. Vivian needed this charity gala to project financial invincibility. She needed to secure a massive emergency bridge loan from the bank executives attending tonight, just to save her own collapsing estate from foreclosure. "Pull yourself together right now, Tasha," Vivian hissed, keeping her voice dangerously low so the catering staff would not overhear the scandal. "Do not say another word about Liam running away, and absolutely do not mention the federal government. You are going to put on your custom designer gown, fix your ruined face, and walk into this ballroom tonight smiling like royalty." "But Mom, he stole all my money," Tasha cried out, sobbing uncontrollably. "He left me and the kids with nothing. I do not care about your money right now," Vivian snapped with terrifying coldness. "If word gets out tonight that this family is under federal investigation, the bank executives will pull my loan immediately. We will all end up living on the streets by tomorrow morning. You keep your mouth completely shut and you play your part for the cameras. I will deal with the mess Liam created tomorrow." Vivian hung up the phone, leaving her daughter weeping alone in a dark, empty apartment. Across the city, I sat in my home office watching my monitors glow. I had set up automated tracking alerts on every financial account Marcus and Liam touched. A bright red notification flashed across my screen. A massive wire transfer had just cleared a routing protocol heading straight for the Cayman Islands. Liam was making his run for it. I tracked the IP address of the device that initiated the fraudulent transfer. The signal pinged directly off a public wireless network inside Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. I picked up my encrypted cell phone and dialed my handler at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "He drained the joint account, and he is making a desperate run for the border," I said, my eyes locked on the blinking red dot illuminating my map. "Alert your security teams right now. He is heading straight for Terminal E." The federal agent on the other end of the line confirmed the intercept protocol. I ended the call and tossed the encrypted phone onto my mahogany desk. Liam was handled. Now it was time to handle the matriarch. I walked into my expansive walk-in closet and bypassed the conservative business suits. Tonight required armor. Tonight required a spectacle. I pulled out a custom emerald green couture gown that swept the floor with dangerous elegance. Then I opened the velvet box Marcus had hidden in his personal safe last year. The $500,000 diamond necklace rested inside, heavy and dripping with the dirty money he had siphoned from working-class families. I fastened it around my neck. It felt like cold, hard justice. Across town, the grand ballroom at the luxury hotel in Buckhead was blindingly opulent. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the absolute pinnacle of Atlanta high society. Women in designer gowns and men in tailored tuxedos clinked champagne glasses, celebrating their own excellence. At the center of it all stood Vivian holding court. She wore a shimmering gold dress, masking her utter financial terror with a practiced, dazzling smile. She was desperately cornering the executive board members of the largest commercial bank in the state. She poured them top-shelf whiskey, laughing loudly at their mediocre jokes while silently begging them to approve the bridge loan that would save her foreclosed estate. She needed this crowd to believe her family was a dynasty of untouchable wealth. She needed them to believe the elite illusion. The massive mahogany double doors of the ballroom swung open with a resounding thud. The sudden noise cut through the polite jazz music and the low hum of wealthy chatter. Every head in the room turned. I stepped over the threshold and let the heavy doors close behind me. The emerald gown trailed behind my every step as I walked directly into the center of the ballroom. The diamonds around my neck caught the light of the chandeliers, throwing brilliant fractured rainbows across the walls. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. People recognized the necklace. It was the legendary piece Marcus had aggressively outbid a tech billionaire for at a charity auction last spring, claiming it was a family heirloom in the making. Now it sat on the collarbone of the woman he was trying to erase. Vivian dropped her champagne flute. The fragile crystal shattered against the polished marble floor, splashing expensive alcohol over the polished shoes of the bank executives. Her eyes bulged as she stared at me. Her golden facade completely melted away, revealing the terrified, desperate woman underneath. She excused herself from the bankers with a frantic, trembling voice and marched directly toward me. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor. She signaled wildly to the two large security guards flanking the entrance. "What do you think you are doing, Jada?" Vivian hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper as she blocked my path. "You are not on the guest list. You are a suspended accountant who has completely lost her mind. Get out of my gala before I have you thrown into the street." I looked down at her. She was sweating. The heavy foundation on her face was starting to crease. "I am just here to support the community, Vivian," I said, my voice perfectly pleasant and loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "After all, charity is the cornerstone of this family, is it not?" The two security guards approached, reaching out to grab my arms. I did not flinch. I turned to the taller guard and spoke with absolute authority. "If you put a single finger on this $500,000 necklace, you will be personally liable for any scratched diamonds. Furthermore, I am a registered stakeholder in the corporate sponsor of this event. Touching me is a massive lawsuit waiting to happen. Step back." The guards hesitated, looking at Vivian for confirmation. That split second of hesitation was all I needed. I slipped past Vivian and strode purposefully toward the raised auction stage at the front of the ballroom. The charity auctioneer was in the middle of presenting a luxury vacation package, but he stepped aside when he saw the sheer determination in my eyes. I climbed the velvet steps and walked straight to the microphone. I tapped the metal grill. The sharp feedback whined through the massive speakers, silencing the entire ballroom instantly. 500 of the most powerful people in Atlanta stared up at me in absolute dead silence. Vivian was rushing toward the stage, her face twisted in pure panic. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice echoing across the vast, silent room. "My name is Jada. I am the wife of your esteemed real estate developer, Marcus. I know Vivian has been telling you all about the incredible success of our family business tonight. I know she has been desperately asking the bank executives in the front row for a very generous commercial bridge loan. But I am here to announce a different kind of financial contribution." Vivian reached the bottom of the stairs, waving her arms. "Cut the microphone right now!" she screamed at the sound technician. I kept my eyes locked on the crowd, ignoring her completely. "I am proud to announce a $5 million donation to this charity." A shockwave of stunned whispers swept through the crowd. $5 million was unheard of. The bank executives looked incredibly impressed. Vivian froze at the bottom of the stairs, her mouth hanging wide open in utter disbelief. I gripped the edges of the wooden podium. But you should all know exactly where this incredible donation is coming from. I continued leaning into the microphone. It is funded entirely by the forced federal liquidation of the fraudulent real estate assets of Marcus. Every single dime of his money laundering syndicate is being seized right now by the authorities. Enjoy the gala, everyone. Have a truly wonderful, unforgettable night. The microphone amplified the sharp intake of breath from the bank executives sitting in the front row. I did not step down from the podium. I gripped the sides of the wooden stand and leaned closer to the microphone, making sure every single syllable echoed through the massive ballroom. You see, Marcus was not building affordable luxury housing for our community. He was running a massive real estate Ponzi scheme. He deliberately targeted hard-working families right here in the metropolitan area. I took their life savings as deposits for unbuilt properties and used that stolen cash to pay off the massive defaulting commercial loans of his previous failed projects. He falsified appraisal documents to secure multi-million-dollar construction funds from the very bank executives sitting in this room tonight. I looked directly at the regional banking director who had been sipping expensive scotch with Vivian just 5 minutes earlier. The color completely drained from his face. He dropped his crystal glass onto the table. I continued speaking, my voice cutting through the rising panic in the room with absolute precision. Marcus and his brother-in-law Liam created an elaborate maze of shell companies to wash the stolen deposits. They used your charity gala Vivian to legitimize their theft. They used the church construction funds. They used the very financial foundations of this community to fund their luxury cars, their designer wardrobes, and their offshore gambling accounts. But the math always catches up. The numbers never lie. Vivian finally reached the bottom of the stage steps. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "Shut up!" She shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Turn off that microphone right now! Somebody grab her! She is a liar! She is a bitter, jealous woman trying to ruin my son because she could not give him a child. You are a disgrace, Jada. Get off my stage right now!" She lunged up the first 2 velvet steps, but her designer heels caught on the heavy fabric of her dress. She stumbled, falling hard onto her knees. Her heavy gold gown pooled around her on the stairs. She looked absolutely pathetic, scrambling to pull herself up. I stood above her, completely unbothered by her desperate screaming. "You built your entire identity on the illusion of wealth, Vivian," I said, staring down at her painted face. "You judged everyone by their bank accounts and their social status, while your own son was robbing innocent families blind to buy your silence and fund your lifestyle. The illusion is over. The curtain is dropping. Look out the window, Vivian. Look at the reality coming for you." Right on cue, brilliant flashes of red and blue light violently pierced through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the luxury hotel ballroom. The sweeping beams painted the elegant walls in frantic, alternating colors. The deafening wail of federal sirens pierced the night air, completely drowning out the smooth jazz playing over the sound system. The elite guests of the gala began to scream and scatter in absolute terror. Women in expensive couture gowns shoved past each other, tripping over their heels in a desperate attempt to move away from the grand entrance. The massive mahogany double doors did not just open. They burst inward with explosive force, hitting the walls with a thunderous crack. A tactical team of federal agents wearing dark, heavy armor swarmed into the elegant ballroom. Following right behind them were a dozen investigators wearing navy blue windbreakers with the bright yellow letters of the Internal Revenue Service printed boldly across their backs. "Nobody move." A federal agent shouted through a heavy bullhorn, his voice echoing like thunder across the marble floor. "Secure all the exits. Nobody leaves this room until we say so." Marcus had been standing near the back bar, trying to blend into the shadows when I started my speech. He saw the tactical teams pouring through the main doors, and pure animal panic took over his body. He abandoned his mother. He abandoned his pride. He abandoned his entire fake empire. He turned and sprinted desperately toward the service doors leading to the catering kitchen. "Stop right there!" an agent yelled, pointing directly at the fleeing real estate developer. Marcus shoved a waiter out of the way, sending a heavy silver tray of champagne crashing to the floor, but he was not fast enough. 2 federal agents cut him off at the kitchen entrance. Marcus tried to pivot and run toward the outdoor patio, but a third agent tackled him hard around the waist. The force of the impact sent Marcus flying through the air and crashing face first into a heavy catering table. The table collapsed under their weight, bringing a massive crystal ice sculpture down on top of them. Marcus hit the marble floor with a sickening thud. The federal agents immediately pinned his arms behind his back. "Stop resisting," one of the agents commanded, pressing a knee firmly between the shoulder blades of my husband. "I am the CEO." Marcus screamed, his voice muffled by the cold marble floor. "You cannot do this to me. Do you know who my mother is? I have lawyers. I have power. Get your hands off my bespoke tuxedo right now." The agents ignored his pathetic rambling. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly in the suddenly quiet room. They hauled Marcus up to his feet roughly. His expensive custom-tailored tuxedo was torn at the shoulder and soaked with melting ice water. His face was bruised and bleeding from a cut above his left eye. The entire room of Atlanta high society watched in absolute silent horror as the golden child of the city was paraded through the center of the ballroom in heavy metal chains. Vivian was still kneeling on the velvet steps of the auction stage. Her hands were clutching her chest as she hyperventilated loudly. Her chest heaved up and down in rapid, shallow breaths. She watched her golden boy, her perfect heir, the son she had fiercely defended over me, being dragged away like a common street criminal. "No," Vivian wailed, stretching a shaking hand out toward the agents. "Marcus, tell them it is a mistake, Marcus. Tell them you are innocent. Tell them Jada did this to you." Marcus did not even look at her. He kept his head down, humiliated and defeated, as the agents marched him out the broken double doors and into the night. Vivian collapsed completely, sobbing into the velvet carpet of the stage. Her reputation was dead. Her social standing was incinerated into ash. The bank executives she had been begging for a loan were already dialing their legal departments to freeze her remaining assets and distance themselves from her name. A tall, stern-looking investigator, wearing an Internal Revenue Service windbreaker, detached himself from the main tactical group. He walked deliberately toward the stage and stopped right in front of Vivian. He looked down at the sobbing matriarch, holding a thick, heavy file folder in his hands. He did not offer her a hand to help her up. He did not offer her a single ounce of sympathy. "Ma'am," the investigator said, his voice sharp and strictly professional, cutting through her loud sobbing. "I am Special Agent Thomas with the Financial Crimes Division. We have some very serious questions regarding the $2 million offshore retirement funds you personally authorized to back these fraudulent construction loans." The morning sun cast a cold, bright light across the marble foyer of my estate. The silence of the house was broken by a frantic ringing at the front gate. My security team alerted me to a visitor. It was Vivian. I authorized the guards to let her through. I wanted to see the aftermath of the gala in the harsh light of day. When I opened the heavy front door, the woman standing on my porch looked absolutely nothing like the formidable matriarch of Atlanta high society who had tormented me for 7 years. Her golden gown from the night before was wrinkled and stained with spilled champagne. Her hair, which was usually styled into an immaculate crown, was flattened and disheveled. The heavy makeup she wore to mask her age was completely washed away by hours of terrified sobbing. Special Agent Thomas had clearly kept her in an interrogation room until dawn. She pushed past me into the foyer, smelling of stale sweat and sheer panic. "Jada, you have to fix this." Vivian gasped, her voice completely hoarse. She stumbled forward, her knees giving out. The proud woman who once looked down on my working-class roots collapsed directly onto my polished marble floor. She grabbed the hem of my silk morning robe, clutching the fabric with shaking, desperate hands. "Please, Jada," Vivian begged, looking up at me with wild, bloodshot eyes. "Tell the federal agents I did not know about the fraud. Tell the Internal Revenue Service you made a mistake about my offshore accounts. Retract the evidence. Save my son. He is your husband. You took a vow before God to protect this family." I looked down at the pathetic woman groveling at my feet. I did not step away. I wanted her to feel the absolute coldness of my presence. I wanted her to feel the weight of every cruel word she had ever spoken to me. I looked at the hands gripping my robe. Those were the same hands that had pointed me toward the door at the restaurant. Those were the same hands that had gladly welcomed a lying pregnant mistress into her elite circle just to punish me. When you sat at that anniversary dinner and defended a pregnant mistress, did you remember I was your daughter-in-law? I asked, my voice echoing off the high ceilings with deadly precision. When you looked me in the eye and told the entire table I was barren, did you remember my vows before God then? You did not care about my marriage, Vivian. You only cared about your legacy. You let your son parade another woman in my face because you thought she would give you an heir to show off to your sorority sisters. You do not even care about Marcus right now. You care about your country club membership. You care about the fact that your wealthy friends saw you humiliated on a stage. Vivian let out a loud, wretched sob. Her tears fell onto the marble floor. That is not true, she cried, her chest heaving. I love my son. He made a mistake, but he is a good man. He just got in over his head with Liam. Liam is the one who ruined everything. You cannot let them put Marcus in a federal penitentiary, Jada. He will not survive it. You hold all the power now. You can call your handler and make this go away. Please, I am begging you on my hands and knees as a mother. I will do anything you want. I will give you my blessing. I will publicly apologize to you in front of the entire church congregation. I will tell everyone you are the true backbone of this family. Just give me my life back. I reached down and forcibly peeled her fingers off my silk robe. I took a deliberate step back, forcing her to look up at me from the ground. Your blessing is absolutely worthless to me, Vivian. I stated, my tone entirely devoid of pity. Your public apologies mean nothing. Your church congregation is probably holding an emergency meeting right now to remove your name from their donor walls. Your social status is dead. You are a broke, disgraced woman facing federal indictment for financing a massive real estate Ponzi scheme. The agents already traced the $2 million you authorized to back those fraudulent construction loans. The government is going to seize your mansion, your cars, and your jewelry by the end of the week. You are going to be left with absolutely nothing. Vivian covered her face with her hands, weeping uncontrollably. She knew I was right. The interrogation had terrified her. She knew the federal government had a rock-solid case against her for criminal conspiracy and wire fraud. She was staring down the barrel of a 10-year mandatory minimum sentence. The thought of trading her tailored suits for a standard-issue prison uniform was actively destroying her mind. I walked over to a small console table and poured myself a glass of iced water. I took a slow sip, letting the silence stretch. I let the absolute gravity of her situation crush her spirit for a few more seconds. I watched her shoulders shake. I watched her pride disintegrate into ash. This was the exact moment I had engineered. This was the precise leverage I needed to completely dismantle the remaining toxic structures of their elite syndicate. I set my glass down on the table. The sharp clink of the glass made Vivian jump. I walked back over and stood above her. I have the power to keep you out of federal prison, Vivian. I said, my voice dropping to a low, calculated register. I have the authority as a protected federal whistleblower to testify that you were completely manipulated by Marcus and Liam. I can tell the agents you were an unwitting victim who lacked the financial literacy to understand the documents you signed. I can ensure you avoid an orange jumpsuit. Vivian ripped her hands away from her face. Hope ignited in her red, swollen eyes. You will do that, she gasped, pushing herself up slightly from the floor. You will save me. I did not smile. I did not offer her an ounce of warmth. I can do it, I corrected her. But I am a forensic accountant, Vivian. I do not give away my assets for free. I require a transaction. I will offer you a devil of a bargain. I can keep you out of that federal penitentiary. But you have to give me something very specific in return. Something you value more than your own son. Vivian stopped crying. Her bloodshot eyes widened in pure terror. What are you talking about? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. I do not have anything left, Jada. The government took my house. They took my accounts. I am completely empty. You are lying, Vivian, I said, my tone sharp and unyielding. You are a woman obsessed with control. When Marcus and Liam started laundering that construction money, you did not just blindly sign the wire transfers. You kept your own receipts. You kept a physical handwritten record of every single stolen dollar you funneled into the mega church building fund. You kept an exact tally of the illicit cash you used to buy your Lifetime Achievement Awards for your elite sorority chapter. I know about the red leather-bound ledgers, Vivian. I know you kept them hidden because you never trusted digital banking. You wanted tangible proof of your power. Vivian let out a sharp gasp. She scrambled backward on the marble floor, wrapping her arms around her ruined gown. No, she choked out, shaking her head violently. No, Jada, please. If I give you those ledgers, the federal investigators will seize the church accounts. They will publicly audit the sorority foundation. My name is on every single one of those charitable donations. The pastor will excommunicate me. The board will publicly denounce me. My legacy will be completely destroyed. I built the reputation of this family for 40 years. You are asking me to strip myself naked in front of the entire city of Atlanta. I will have nothing. I looked down at the pathetic matriarch who valued her country club status over human decency. It is either your legacy or your liberty, Vivian, I stated coldly. You can keep your little red books and you can share a concrete cell block with your son for the next 15 years. Or you can hand them over to me right now and you can walk out of my house a free woman with a ruined name. The choice is yours, but you have exactly 60 seconds to make it. The federal agents are waiting for my phone call. Vivian stared at me, her chest heaving with panic. The internal battle raging inside her was disgusting to witness. On one hand was her golden child, the son she had defended when he paraded a pregnant mistress in my face. On the other hand was her own comfort, her own selfish survival. It did not even take her the full 60 seconds. The instinct for self-preservation overpowered whatever maternal loyalty she had left. Vivian reached into the oversized designer tote bag she had dragged into my foyer. Her hands were shaking violently as she unzipped a hidden compartment in the lining. She pulled out 3 thick red leather-bound notebooks. The gold-embossed lettering on the covers caught the morning light. These were the actual physical records of a massive financial syndicate. These ledgers detailed how the savings of working-class Black families were stolen and repackaged as high society philanthropy. She held them out to me, her hands trembling so badly the books almost slipped from her grasp. I did not reach down. I made her place them directly at my feet. If I do this, Jada, Vivian whispered, tears streaming down her ruined face, you promise me I will not go to prison. You promise you will tell the authorities I was coerced. I will honor my end of the bargain, Vivian, I said, picking up the heavy ledgers from the marble floor. I opened the first book and flipped through the thick pages. There they were. The exact dates, amounts, and routing numbers that proved Marcus had deliberately engineered the entire real estate Ponzi scheme. These handwritten pages were the absolute final nail in the coffin of her own son. She had just traded his entire life for her own freedom. You will not spend a single night in a federal facility. But your life in Atlanta high society is officially over. You are going to be a ghost in this city. Just as the heavy silence settled over the grand foyer, the cell phone clutched in the hand of Vivian began to buzz loudly. The screen lit up, displaying an automated incoming call from a federal detention center. It was Marcus. He was calling collect from a holding cell. Vivian stared at the ringing phone, completely paralyzed. Answer it, I commanded, stepping closer to her. And put him on speakerphone right now. Vivian fumbled with the screen, swiping to accept the charges. She tapped the speaker icon with a shaking finger. Mom. The voice of Marcus echoed through the quiet foyer. He sounded a night in federal custody. Mom, are you there? Listen to me very carefully. You have to get to the safety deposit box at the downtown bank branch. You have to get those red leather ledgers and burn them right now. Do you hear me? If the feds find those books, I am never getting out of here. Jada already gave them the corporate tax returns, but those ledgers are the only things tying me directly to the church funds. You have to destroy them today. Vivian could not speak. She let out a wretched sobbing sound, covering her mouth with her free hand. Mom. Marcus yelled through the phone, panic spiking in his voice. Why are you crying? Did you get the books? I leaned down close to the speakerphone. My voice was perfectly calm, steady, and devastating. She got the books, Marcus, I said. The line went dead silent. Only the static of the detention center connection hissed through the speaker. Jada. Marcus breathed, his voice dropping into a terrified whisper. What are you doing with my mother? She brought the books directly to me, Marcus. I replied, smiling down at the weeping woman on my floor. I offered her a choice between going to federal prison with you or handing over the evidence that guarantees you get a 15-year mandatory minimum sentence. And guess what, Marcus? Your mother did not even hesitate. She sold you out to save herself. She handed over the smoking gun. Your own mother just locked the door to your cell. No, Marcus screamed through the phone, a visceral, agonizing sound of absolute betrayal. Mom, tell me she is lying. Mom, say something. Vivian just sobbed uncontrollably into her hands, unable to utter a single word of defense to the son she had just destroyed. The familial bond of the elite Atlanta dynasty was completely and irrevocably obliterated. Vivian scrambled off the marble floor of my foyer, clutching her empty designer tote bag. She did not look back as she stumbled out the heavy front doors, leaving the red leather ledgers resting securely in my possession. I locked the deadbolt behind her. The silence in my house felt different now. It felt like absolute victory. But the fallout from the destruction of Marcus and Vivian was far from over. Less than 48 hours later, the security monitor on my wall chimed again. I checked the camera, expecting another federal agent or perhaps a desperate defense attorney. Instead, I saw Tasha, the pampered, arrogant sister-in-law who had spent the last 7 years treating me like the hired help, was standing on my porch. She looked nothing like the polished buckhead princess who had attended the anniversary dinner. She was wearing a plain gray sweatsuit. Her face was bare of any makeup, revealing dark, exhausted circles under her eyes. She was shivering in the brisk Atlanta morning air, looking incredibly small and entirely defeated. I opened the door. I fully expected her to scream. I expected her to blame me for the total collapse of her perfect life. I braced myself for the usual toxic defense mechanisms her mother had taught her. But Tasha did not raise her voice. She did not point a finger. She simply crossed the threshold into my foyer and broke down. She dropped to her knees exactly where her mother had groveled 2 days earlier and buried her face in her hands. Deep, agonizing sobs shook her entire body. "Jada, he left me." Tasha wept, her voice muffled by her trembling hands. "Liam drained every single account. He took the savings accounts for the children. He took the emergency funds. He took my quarterly trust disbursement. He left us with absolutely zero. I tried to buy groceries this morning, and my card declined at the register. I did not offer her a tissue. I leaned against the console table and watched her face the reality of the man she had married. You are crying over empty bank accounts, Tasha," I stated coldly. "You should be crying over the fact that your husband was funding the prenatal care of his pregnant mistress while smiling in your face at Sunday dinner." Tasha flinched as if I had struck her. She looked up at me, her eyes swimming with fresh tears of total humiliation. "I know," she gasped, clutching her chest. "I know everything now." But Liam did not even make it out of the state, Jada. The federal agents swarmed him at Hartsfield-Jackson. They tackled him right at the security checkpoint in Terminal E. He was screaming like a coward. He was yelling in front of hundreds of passengers that Marcus forced him to do it. He told the agents Marcus set him up to take the fall for the entire money laundering syndicate. I nodded slowly, processing the information. Liam was exactly the kind of weak, opportunistic, white-collar criminal I knew he was. He was willing to throw his brother-in-law under the bus the second the federal cuffs clicked around his wrists. Tasha slowly pulled herself up from the floor, wrapping her arms around her waist. She looked around my pristine, secure estate. "My mother will not even answer my calls, Jada," she whispered, her voice cracking with betrayal. "Vivian told me to keep quiet, and then she completely abandoned me to save herself. My brother is in a federal holding cell. My husband is facing decades in prison. My entire life was a massive lie. You were the only one telling the truth. You were the only one who actually worked an honest day in your life, while we all sat around and judged you for it. I am so sorry, Jada. I am so incredibly sorry." I looked at the broken woman standing in my hallway. I did not feel the same venom toward Tasha that I felt toward Vivian or Keisha. Tasha was spoiled and deeply flawed, but she was also a victim of the massive illusion her mother had constructed. Vivian had raised her to be a beautiful blind pawn. "Follow me," I commanded, turning on my heel and walking toward my home office. Tasha followed me quietly. I walked over to my desk and opened the heavy red leather ledgers Vivian had surrendered. I pointed to the rows of handwritten numbers and illicit wire transfers. "Look at this, Tasha," I said, my voice carrying the weight of a seasoned forensic accountant. "Look at the foundation of your elite Atlanta dynasty. Your mother used stolen money from working-class families to buy her position on the church board. Marcus used fraudulent construction loans to buy his luxury cars. Liam generated fake invoices to cover his underground gambling debts and fund his affair with Keisha. Your entire existence was subsidized by predatory financial crimes." Tasha stared at the ledgers. Her hands trembled as she traced the columns of stolen money. The last remaining fragments of her privileged illusion shattered completely. She backed away from the desk, shaking her head in absolute disgust. "It is all blood money," she whispered, staring at the pages like they were toxic. "Everything I own is dirty." She looked up at me with a sudden fierce desperation in her eyes. "I want out, Jada. I want to protect my children from this poison. I need to file for divorce from Liam immediately, and I need to secure sole custody of my kids before the federal government freezes whatever assets are tied to his name. But I have no money for a lawyer. I cannot afford representation. You know how the legal system works. You know how to untangle this mess. Please, Jada, you are the only person who can help me." I studied her face. I saw the genuine terror of a mother trying to shield her children from the devastating fallout of a criminal syndicate. I walked around the mahogany desk and leaned against the edge, crossing my arms. "I will pay for your divorce attorney," I said, my voice sharp and entirely transactional. "I will retain the best family law attorney in Georgia to ensure you get sole physical and legal custody of your children. I will make sure Liam never sees them again." Tasha let out a massive breath of relief, her shoulders slumping. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you, Jada. But I am not doing this out of the kindness of my heart, Tasha." I interrupted, shutting down her gratitude immediately. "I require a transaction. I will fund your legal extraction from this family, but you are going to give me something in return." Tasha wiped her eyes, looking confused and terrified all over again. "I do not have anything left, Jada. What could you possibly want from me?" "I want your testimony," I stated, my eyes locked onto hers with lethal intensity. "Liam is going to try to pin the entire syndicate on Marcus to reduce his own sentence. He is going to try to play the innocent financial consultant who was bullied by his powerful black brother-in-law. I am not going to let him control that narrative in a federal courtroom. I want you to take the stand. I want you to testify under oath about the offshore accounts he maintained. I want you to testify about the cash he kept hidden under the floorboards of your penthouse. I want you to testify about the timeline of his affair with Keisha to prove his character and his motives. You are going to help the federal prosecutors bury your husband." Tasha stared at me, the gravity of my demand settling heavily on her shoulders. Testifying against Liam meant severing the last tie she had to her old life. It meant standing in a crowded courtroom and publicly admitting that she had married a monster. It meant helping the government lock the father of her children in a federal penitentiary for a very long time. She looked at the red leather ledgers sitting on my desk. She thought about the empty bank accounts. She thought about Keisha. The hesitation vanished from her eyes, replaced by a cold, hardened resolve that I had never seen in her before. She straightened her posture, wiping the last remaining tear from her cheek. "I will do it," Tasha said, her voice steady and resolute. "I will tell the federal prosecutors everything they need to know. I will be their star witness." I smiled, a genuine, calculated smile. "Excellent choice, Tasha. Let us get to work." The alliance was officially forged. The trial date for the most explosive white-collar criminal case in the history of Atlanta was officially set on the federal docket. The federal prosecutor assigned to our case was a no-nonsense bulldog of a woman who did not tolerate games in her courtroom. I spent the next 4 weeks buried in a windowless conference room inside the Richard B. Russell Federal Building in downtown Atlanta. The defense team representing Marcus and Liam attempted to drown the prosecution in millions of pages of meaningless discovery documents. It was a classic white-collar defense strategy designed to confuse a jury and obscure the paper trail. They generated thousands of dummy invoices from ghost construction suppliers, claiming the missing deposits were simply bad business investments lost to pandemic supply chain issues. They thought the sheer volume of paperwork would exhaust the government resources. They thought they could bury the truth under a mountain of fabricated corporate expenses. They forgot the government had me. I sat at a cold metal table and systematically dismantled their entire defense transaction by transaction. I matched the serial numbers on the dummy invoices directly to the red leather ledgers Vivian had surrendered. I highlighted the precise digital pathways Liam used to funnel the stolen deposits from the fake construction companies straight into his offshore gambling accounts. I mapped out the exact times and dates the funds were moved across international borders. I translated their complex financial jargon into simple, undeniable math. The lead federal prosecutor watched me trace a $2 million wire transfer hidden beneath 6 layers of corporate jargon and smiled. We were building an airtight cage around my husband and his brother-in-law. The financial evidence was absolute and unbreakable. But Marcus was not going down without a vicious fight. His new defense attorney realized they could not win on the financial facts, so they pivoted to destroying my personal credibility. If they could paint me as an unreliable, vindictive witness, they could plant reasonable doubt in the minds of the jury. The smear campaign launched on a Tuesday morning. I walked into the lobby of my Midtown office building and saw my face plastered across the front page of an Atlanta tabloid blog known for trafficking in high society scandals. The headline was massive and cruel. It called me a bitter, barren wife, orchestrating a federal witch hunt because my wealthy husband finally left me to start a real family. Marcus and his legal team had intentionally leaked my private fertility clinic records to the press, violating my privacy to save his own skin. They spun a pathetic narrative portraying Marcus as a desperate man who only turned to Keisha because I was emotionally unstable and physically incapable of giving him an heir. They hired crisis public relations managers to flood social media platforms with stories claiming I forged the holding company documents out of pure jealousy. They wanted me to crack. They wanted me to issue an angry public statement defending my womanhood. They wanted me to go on daytime television and cry about my broken marriage so they could label me hysterical in front of the judge. They wanted to break my focus. I did not engage with the media. I did not give them a single tear or a single quote. I let the blogs talk while I went straight to the source of their power. A high-profile crisis management team and a bulldog defense attorney cost thousands of dollars a day to maintain. Marcus had his domestic assets frozen by the federal indictment, but I knew his behavioral patterns intimately. I knew he had a secret safety net he never mentioned. I was secretly liquidating a hidden cryptocurrency portfolio and funneling the untraceable cash through an offshore account in the Bahamas to pay his legal retainers. I sat at my encrypted laptop and tracked the digital wallet address using custom algorithms. I compiled the transaction hashes confirming his identity and handed the entire data packet to the Internal Revenue Service investigators. Within 48 hours, the federal government seized his cryptocurrency wallets and froze the Bahamian account for explicitly violating the terms of his federal bail agreement. I systematically starved his defense team of their oxygen. When the wire transfers stopped clearing, his high-priced public relations firm dropped him, immediately deleting every article they had planted. When the retainer account dipped below zero, his defense attorney filed an emergency motion demanding payment. I sat in my home office sipping sparkling water and watching the media narrative dry up the exact second the money stopped flowing. Marcus was completely broke and defenseless. His reputation was officially bleeding out on the pavement. The prosecution was ready to deliver the final blow. The federal subpoena was officially served to Keisha on a rainy Friday afternoon. She was tracked down to a cheap rundown motel on the outskirts of the city, where she had been hiding since Liam abandoned her on the highway. She was dragged into the federal building looking terrified, exhausted, and completely destitute. The prosecutors placed her in an interrogation room and laid out the overwhelming evidence. They informed her she was facing serious accessory charges for signing the fraudulent real estate documents Marcus had given her during their affair. They told her she was looking at a minimum of 5 to 10 years in a federal facility away from the child she was carrying. Keisha broke down immediately, sobbing uncontrollably. She slammed her hands on the cold metal table and begged the agents for mercy. She demanded an immunity deal to avoid jail time. She looked the lead prosecutor right in the eye and offered them the one thing they did not even know they needed. She offered to testify on the federal stand that the entire pregnancy announcement was a calculated manipulation. She promised to provide the direct text messages, proving Marcus paid her to fake the timeline, to emotionally destroy me, and force me to surrender the corporate assets. Keisha was ready to burn Marcus completely to the ground to save herself. It was over. The heavy oak doors of the federal courtroom swung open, and the bailiff called my name. I walked down the center aisle of the Richard B. Russell Federal Building, feeling the eyes of every reporter and spectator burning into my back. I wore a tailored crimson suit that projected absolute authority. I stepped into the witness box and raised my right hand, swearing to tell the truth. The lead federal prosecutor approached the podium and handed me a laser pointer. For the next 4 hours, I transformed that federal courtroom into a masterclass on forensic accounting. I stood in front of a massive digital projector and dismantled the luxury real estate empire of my husband transaction by transaction. I guided the jury through the complex labyrinth of shell companies Marcus and Liam had built. I showed them exactly how working-class deposits were siphoned into dummy corporations. I pointed to the glowing screen, highlighting the specific routing numbers that moved stolen cash from local construction sites directly into offshore accounts in the Bahamas. I explained the mechanics of wire fraud with icy precision, breaking down complex financial jargon into simple, undeniable theft. I did not look at Marcus. I kept my eyes locked on the 12 jurors, making sure they understood that this was not a victimless white-collar crime. This was a predatory syndicate designed to rob the vulnerable. The prosecutor finished her direct examination and sat down, leaving the defense table in complete disarray. The high-priced defense attorney for Marcus stood up and buttoned his jacket. He knew he could not defeat my mathematical evidence, so he resorted to the only weapon he had left. He needed to destroy my character. He strutted toward the witness stand with a condescending smile. He leaned against the wooden rail and lowered his voice, trying to sound sympathetic. "Jada, is it not true that your entire testimony today is nothing more than a desperate act of revenge?" he asked, pacing in front of the jury box. "Is it not true that you are simply a bitter, jealous wife whose marriage fell apart because you were unable to give your successful husband a child?" He turned to the jury, making sure they caught every word of his theatrical performance. He brought up the anniversary dinner at the restaurant in Buckhead. He painted a tragic picture of Marcus as a wealthy, loving husband who only strayed because I was cold and barren. He claimed I was so consumed by jealousy over the pregnancy of my best friend Keisha that I fabricated this entire financial conspiracy just to steal the assets of his client. "You wanted to destroy him because he found happiness with another woman," the defense attorney shouted, pointing an accusing finger directly at my face. "You used your accounting skills to frame an innocent man because you could not stand the fact that Keisha was carrying his heir. You are a scorned woman willing to commit perjury to soothe your bruised ego. Tell the truth to this jury, Jada." I sat perfectly still in the witness chair, letting his aggressive shouting echo through the massive courtroom. I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear. I looked at the defense attorney with absolute calm. "Your narrative is incredibly compelling, counselor," I said, my voice steady and clear, ringing out through the microphone. "But just like the financial ledgers of your client, your narrative is built on a massive, verifiable lie." I turned to the judge and requested permission to submit a new piece of entered evidence. The judge nodded, and a court clerk handed a sealed folder to the defense attorney and another to the jury foreman. I leaned into the microphone. "Inside that folder, you will find certified pediatric medical records from Emory University Hospital," I stated, watching the color instantly drain from the face of the defense attorney. "Those records prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Marcus contracted a severe case of the mumps when he was 14 years old. The resulting complications left him completely and irreversibly sterile. My husband has a 0% sperm count. He has been physically incapable of fathering a child for over 2 decades. The courtroom erupted into loud gasps. The judge banged his gavel heavily, demanding order. I kept my eyes locked on the jury. Marcus knew he could not fire me from the holding companies because I was the sole managing director. I explained, raising my voice over the murmurs of the gallery. So he colluded with Keisha. He paid her $50,000 from a hidden offshore account to fake a paternity claim at our anniversary dinner. We have the text messages and the bank transfers proving he orchestrated that entire emotional ambush. He used a fake pregnancy to emotionally destroy me, hoping I would have a mental breakdown, and blindly sign over the corporate assets in a divorce settlement. He did not cheat to build a family. He created a psychological weapon to force me out of my own company. He weaponized my fertility struggles to cover up his federal crimes. The silence that fell over the federal courtroom was absolute and suffocating. The 12 jurors turned their heads simultaneously to look at the defense table. The expressions on their faces shifted from polite attention to sheer unadulterated disgust. They looked at Marcus like he was a monster. The defense attorney dropped the medical file onto his table, his hands shaking as he realized his client had lied to him again. He slowly backed away from the podium, completely out of questions. Marcus sank low into his heavy wooden chair, his arrogant posture crumbling into dust. He stared at the jury box, and the terrifying reality finally hit him. He had just watched his entire defense evaporate in a matter of seconds. He realized in that exact single terrifying moment that he had completely and undeniably lost the federal trial and his freedom forever. The heavy silence in the federal courtroom was shattered when the lead prosecutor called her next witness. Keisha walked through the heavy wooden doors, and every eye in the gallery turned to watch her. She looked nothing like the glamorous cutthroat real estate agent who used to strut through Buckhead. She wore a drab, oversized sweater, and her face was completely bare of makeup. She kept her head bowed as she took the oath and sat in the witness box. Her hands were shaking violently as she adjusted the microphone. The prosecutor did not waste any time at all. She asked Keisha to explain her exact role in the syndicate. Keisha broke down immediately. Huge racking sobs echoed through the courtroom as she pointed a trembling finger at the defense table. She confessed to everything. She told the jury that Liam had cornered her in her office and threatened to destroy her real estate license if she did not sleep with him. She claimed she was terrified of his connections. Then she turned her tear-filled eyes toward my husband. Keisha detailed exactly how Marcus had manipulated the finances. She explained that Marcus needed someone to handle the physical cash drops and forge the signatures of the working-class buyers. He promised her a massive cut of the profits and a partnership in his firm. But the most damning moment came when the prosecutor asked about the anniversary dinner. Keisha looked directly at me, sitting in the front row of the gallery, and wept. She confessed that Marcus paid her $50,000 in untraceable cash to fake the pregnancy. She told the jury Marcus explicitly instructed her to break my heart in front of his mother so I would be too devastated to fight for the corporate assets. She painted herself as a desperate victim, forced into compliance by two powerful men. It was a pathetic display, but it was incredibly effective. The jury looked at Marcus with absolute revulsion. The prosecution was not finished dismantling the defense. They called their final star witness. Liam walked into the courtroom wearing a cheap gray suit. The polished, arrogant white investment consultant who used to lecture everyone at Sunday dinner looked completely terrified. He avoided making eye contact with Tasha, who sat 2 rows behind me, glaring at him with pure, unadulterated hatred. Liam took the stand and immediately threw Marcus under the speeding bus. He did not hesitate. He did not stutter. He turned to the jury and claimed he was nothing more than a naive pawn caught in the web of a brilliant, manipulative mastermind. He testified that Marcus engineered the entire Ponzi scheme from the very beginning. The prosecutor asked Liam how Marcus managed to secure such massive fraudulent construction loans from highly conservative banking institutions. Liam leaned into the microphone and delivered the killing blow. He needed a white face. Liam stated, his voice ringing clearly across the room. Marcus told me that the bank executives would ask too many questions if a black developer asked for $50 million in unsecured credit. He told me to use my background and my skin color to walk into those boardrooms and make the executives feel comfortable. He exploited my privilege to bypass the financial background checks. I just signed the papers because he promised me it was a standard industry practice. I was blinded by his ambition. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Liam had gladly taken millions of dollars to fund his offshore gambling addiction, but now he was playing the innocent victim of a predatory black businessman. It was the ultimate betrayal. The racial dynamics he injected into the testimony were incredibly calculated and deeply explosive. Marcus snapped. The cool, wealthy Buckhead real estate developer persona completely evaporated. Marcus leaped out of his heavy leather chair with such explosive force that the heavy piece of furniture crashed backward onto the floor. "You lying parasite!" Marcus roared, his voice booming like thunder across the federal courtroom. His face was contorted with absolute unhinged fury. He pointed a shaking hand at Liam, who shrank back into the witness chair in sheer terror. "You begged me to let you into those deals. You came to me crying because you owed $1 million to bookies in Las Vegas. I saved your life, you pathetic coward." The defense attorney desperately grabbed the arm of Marcus, trying to pull him back down, but Marcus shoved him away violently. He turned his raging eyes toward Keisha, who was sitting in the gallery waiting to be transported back to a holding facility. "And you," Marcus screamed, pointing at his former mistress. "You greedy gold digger. You demanded that cash. You loved spending that dirty money while you were sleeping with him behind the back of my sister. You are both nothing without me. I built everything. I fed all of you." The federal courtroom descended into absolute pandemonium. Tasha jumped up from her seat, screaming curses at her brother and her husband. The reporters in the back row were furiously typing on their phones, documenting the spectacular implosion of the Atlanta elite. The federal judge hammered his heavy wooden gavel, repeatedly demanding order, but Marcus could not be silenced. He was completely unhinged, thrashing against the defense table and screaming obscenities at the prosecutors. The judge signaled to the United States Marshals, standing at the perimeter of the room. 4 heavily armed marshals rushed the defense table. They grabbed Marcus by the shoulders and slammed him hard against the wooden surface, forcing his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy handcuffs echoed over the shouting crowd. Marcus continued to scream and thrash as the marshals physically dragged him out of the courtroom through a side door. His bespoke suit was torn, and his dignity was completely eradicated. The judge banged his gavel one final time, bringing a stunned, breathless silence back to the room. The judge glared at the empty defense table with absolute disgust. He announced that due to the violent outburst and the conclusion of the testimony, the court would take a mandatory 2-hour recess. He instructed the jury to clear the room and prepare for final deliberations. The tension in the air was thick and palpable. The end was officially here. The 2 hours of mandatory recess felt like an absolute eternity. When the heavy oak doors finally swung open again, the atmosphere inside the federal courtroom was entirely different. All the explosive rage and chaotic energy had been completely drained out of the room, leaving behind a cold, suffocating dread. The gallery was packed shoulder to shoulder with aggressive reporters, local community leaders, and the hard-working families who had lost their entire life savings to the syndicate. I sat in the front row, perfectly composed, smoothing the pristine fabric of my tailored crimson suit. Tasha sat 2 rows behind me, her face a mask of hardened stone. The side door opened, and the United States Marshals brought Marcus and Liam back into the room. They were both in heavy metal chains. The bespoke, expensive suits they had worn that morning were rumpled, torn, and ruined. Marcus looked completely hollowed out. His arrogant swagger was entirely gone, replaced by the terrifying realization that his elite status could no longer shield him from reality. He kept his eyes glued to the floor, refusing to look at the gallery. The jury filed into the box and handed the official verdict sheet to the bailiff. The foreman stood up, and his voice rang clear across the perfectly silent room. "Guilty on all counts of wire fraud. Guilty on all counts of money laundering. Guilty on all counts of federal conspiracy." Marcus closed his eyes and his head dropped heavily toward his chest. Liam let out a pathetic whimper, burying his face in his manacled hands. The federal judge took the paperwork and looked down from his elevated bench. His expression was full of absolute, unfiltered disdain. He did not look at them as wealthy businessmen. He looked at them as dangerous predators. The judge leaned into his microphone and his voice boomed with righteous authority. "Marcus, You were born into extreme privilege. You were given every advantage a man could possibly ask for in this city. You stood on the shoulders of the hardworking black men and women who built Atlanta, and instead of lifting them up, you chose to bleed them dry. You deliberately targeted your own community. You stole the hard-earned deposits of working families who trusted you to build their future, and you used their money to buy luxury cars and fund your illicit affairs. You are not a businessman. You are a parasite feeding on the vulnerable. The judge turned his piercing gaze toward Liam, who was shrinking back into his wooden chair trying to make himself as small as possible. And you, Liam. You walked into those executive bank boardrooms and weaponized your white privilege to bypass the financial safeguards designed to protect this community. You gladly accepted millions in stolen funds to cover your degenerate underground gambling debts, while innocent families faced eviction notices. You two created a sophisticated syndicate of misery disguised as a luxury real estate empire. The devastation you have caused to the economic foundation of this city is absolutely incalculable. You thought your elite country club memberships and your tailored suits placed you high above the law. Today, this court will prove you entirely wrong. The judge picked up his heavy wooden gavel. Marcus, stand up and face this court right now. Marcus slowly rose to his feet. His legs were shaking so badly the heavy metal chains around his ankles rattled loudly in the silent room. For the orchestration of a massive financial fraud and the deliberate exploitation of your community, I sentence you to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. This sentence will be served without the possibility of early parole. You will serve every single day of those 15 years behind bars. Marcus gasped audibly. The air rushed out of his lungs and his knees buckled instantly. The federal marshals had to grab his arms and hoist him up to keep him from collapsing onto the floor. 15 years meant his youth was officially over. His empire was dead. He would walk out of a federal prison as an old, broke, forgotten man with a ruined name. The judge did not pause to let the reality sink in. He immediately turned his wrath to Liam. "Stand up, Liam." Liam stood up, wiping thick snot and desperate tears from his face. "For your role as a co-conspirator and your eager, aggressive participation in this money laundering scheme, I sentence you to 12 years in federal prison." Liam let out a loud, wretched sob that echoed horribly off the high ceilings. I glanced back at Tasha. She did not shed a single tear for the man she had married. She simply stared at him with cold, absolute detachment, her posture completely rigid. She had finally learned how to protect herself from the toxic illusion her mother Vivian had created. The judge then directed his attention to Keisha, who was sitting at the prosecution table clutching a crumpled tissue. "Keisha, you are a licensed real estate professional. You had a legal and moral duty to protect your clients, but instead you chose to facilitate massive theft for a cut of the dirty money. You forged signatures. You handled illicit cash drops. You actively participated in a cruel psychological manipulation against an innocent woman just to secure your place in high society. Because of your cooperation with the federal government, you will avoid a prison cell today. However, I am sentencing you to 3 years of strict federal probation. Furthermore, your real estate license is permanently revoked across the entire country. The Internal Revenue Service has already seized your luxury condo and your bank accounts to pay restitution to the victims you helped defraud. You are walking out of this courthouse today with absolutely nothing." Keisha buried her face in her arms and wept bitterly. She had traded her best friend and her professional integrity for the illusion of elite wealth, and now she was facing total, absolute bankruptcy as a disgraced single mother. The judge banged his gavel heavily, finalizing the total destruction of the syndicate. Court is adjourned. The marshals immediately grabbed Marcus and Liam by the arms, turning them forcefully toward the side door leading to the holding cells. The reporters in the gallery began shouting rapid-fire questions, and bright camera flashes erupted in the hallway outside. As the marshals dragged Marcus toward the exit, he stopped struggling for just one single second. He turned his head and looked over his shoulder. His bloodshot, terrified eyes searched the gallery frantically until they locked directly onto mine. He looked at me with a desperate, pleading expression, silently begging for a shred of the grace and loyalty he had spent 7 long years taking for granted. I stood up from my seat, smoothing the pristine fabric of my crimson suit. I met his desperate gaze with absolute icy calm. I did not smile. I did not sneer. I simply offered him a single slow, dismissive nod. Then I turned my back on him forever and walked out of the courtroom. I stepped out of the heavy federal doors and took a deep breath of the warm Atlanta air. The trial was finally over, but the execution of my deal with Vivian was just beginning. I am a woman of my word. I promised the matriarch I would keep her out of a federal penitentiary, and I delivered exactly that. I sat in a closed-door meeting with the prosecutors and testified that Vivian was nothing more than a clueless, aging pawn manipulated by her aggressive son. The federal government declined to press criminal charges against her. She avoided wearing an orange jumpsuit, and she kept her physical freedom. But freedom without money in Buckhead is simply a different kind of prison. The Internal Revenue Service does not care about plea deals when it comes to collecting back taxes. They moved against her with absolute ruthless efficiency. 3 days after Marcus was sentenced, federal agents arrived at her sprawling luxury estate. They did not knock politely and wait for her to answer. They slapped bright yellow seizure notices directly onto her custom mahogany doors. They brought in heavy moving trucks and systematically stripped her of her entire identity. They seized her vintage cars. They confiscated her imported designer furniture. They cataloged every piece of expensive artwork and boxed up her massive jewelry collection. They audited and drained her hidden emergency accounts to pay restitution to the working-class families Marcus had defrauded. Vivian had to stand on her manicured front lawn, clutching her cheap overnight bag, and watch government contractors carry her massive crystal chandeliers out the front door in cardboard boxes. The federal government left her with exactly one suitcase of basic clothing and absolutely nowhere to go. She was stripped completely bare. But Vivian was incredibly stubborn and deeply delusional. She actually thought she could still cling to her elite social status. She believed her decades of highly publicized philanthropy and her powerful connections would buy her a shred of loyalty. She refused to accept that her power was entirely tied to her stolen bank accounts. The following Sunday, she put on her best remaining tailored suit. She drove a cheap rented sedan to the massive megachurch where she had held a prominent front row seat for 30 long years. She walked through the heavy wooden double doors, holding her head high, expecting her community to rally around her. She expected sympathy for a mother who had just lost her son to the justice system. Instead, she walked into a wall of absolute freezing ice. The elite women she had vacationed with in Paris turned their backs and walked in the opposite direction the second she stepped into the foyer. Her prestigious sorority sisters, the exact same women who used to beg for her influence and her donations, refused to even make eye contact with her. Vivian felt the panic rising in her chest, but she forced a fake smile and marched down the center aisle, demanding her usual velvet seat on the executive church board. The head pastor stopped his sermon right in the middle of a sentence. The massive sanctuary fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. He looked down from his elevated pulpit, and his voice boomed through the sophisticated sound system. He did not offer her a single ounce of grace. He did not offer her a prayer of comfort. He looked directly at Vivian and publicly requested that she step down from the church board and exit the sanctuary immediately. He stated loudly that the congregation could no longer associate with a family dynasty built on the financial ruin of their own community. The humiliation was absolute and total. The ushers approached her pew and physically escorted her down the aisle, while thousands of parishioners watched her walk of shame in dead silent judgment. She tried to grab the arm of the head usher, but he pulled away like she was infected with a disease. She stumbled out into the blinding Sunday sunlight, realizing she was permanently exiled from the only world she had ever known. The glamorous, untouchable matriarch of Atlanta high society was officially dead. With her assets frozen and her reputation incinerated, Vivian was forced to move into a tiny, cramped one-bedroom apartment in a rundown complex on the far dangerous outskirts of the city. She was forced to sell her last remaining gold watch just to afford the security deposit on a place that did not even have a working dishwasher. The transition broke her completely. The walls of her new reality were paper thin. The cheap carpet was stained and smelled of stale cigarette smoke. There were no caterers. There were no valets. There were no country club luncheons. There was only the deafening sound of heavy highway traffic rushing past her single-barred window and the crushing, suffocating weight of her new isolation. She spent her days pacing the tiny living room listening to her neighbors argue through the thin drywall. She had traded the life of her golden child for her own survival. She handed over the red leather ledgers that locked Marcus in a cage just to save her own skin. And now she had to live with the terrifying daily reality that her sacrifice had left her completely and utterly alone. Her phone never rang. Her social calendar was completely blank. She sat on a cheap, uncomfortable fold-out couch, staring at the peeling paint on her low ceiling, realizing she had sacrificed her own flesh and blood for an elite illusion that evaporated the exact second the stolen money ran out. She had nothing but her own overwhelming guilt to keep her company in the dark. Weeks turned into a miserable, grinding routine of poverty. The silence of the cheap apartment finally broke her mind. Desperation clawed fiercely at her throat. She needed money to pay her rising utility bills. She needed money to buy decent groceries. She needed a lifeline before she drowned completely. She picked up her cracked cell phone with trembling hands and scrolled through her completely empty contact list. She stopped when she saw my name. She pressed the green call button, preparing to beg me for a monthly allowance. She was ready to swallow the absolute last remaining shred of her pride and ask the working-class girl she had tormented for 7 years to save her from starvation. She held the phone to her ear, squeezing her eyes shut and holding her breath, praying I would pick up and show her mercy. An automated voice answered immediately, cutting through the silence of her miserable room. The number you have reached has been disconnected and is no longer in service. I changed my phone number the exact same day Marcus was sentenced to federal prison. I cut the final cord to the toxic syndicate that had tried to bury me alive. I was not the only one forced to navigate a completely new reality in the aftermath of the explosive federal trial. Keisha was learning a very brutal lesson about the fierce loyalty of the Atlanta elite. She had eagerly traded her best friend for a counterfeit ticket to high society, and now she was paying the ultimate excruciating price. The federal government swiftly seized her luxury condo and her hidden bank accounts to pay restitution to the victims she had helped defraud. She gave birth to her baby while living in a cramped, humid public housing unit on the dangerous south side of the city. There were no lavish, catered baby showers. There were no expensive designer strollers. The exact same wealthy women she used to sell million-dollar properties to completely blacklisted her from their circles. I heard through the relentless Atlanta grapevine that she was now working a grueling minimum-wage retail job at a discount department store just to afford basic baby formula. One rainy afternoon, she tried to wave at a former wealthy real estate client who was walking past her cash register. The client looked her directly in the eye, turned her head and walked completely past her as if Keisha was totally invisible. She had desperately wanted to climb to the absolute top of the social ladder, but her selfish betrayal had dragged her all the way down to the absolute bottom. She was completely isolated, raising a child alone with absolutely nothing to show for her treachery but a permanently revoked real estate license and a massive mountain of regret. Tasha, on the other hand, chose a completely different path through the smoking ashes of her old life. The divorce from Liam was finalized rapidly, with Liam securely locked in a federal penitentiary and his stolen assets seized by the government. Tasha had to learn how to survive without the massive trust fund her mother had always used to control her. But instead of crumbling into dust like Vivian or becoming hopelessly bitter like Keisha, Tasha actually woke up from her long, privileged slumber. She packed up her 2 young children and moved out of the Buckhead penthouse into a modest 3-bedroom rental house in a quiet, working-class neighborhood. She permanently traded her expensive designer gowns for sensible business attire. She applied for and successfully secured a modest administrative job at a local logistics company. For the very first time in her 32 years of life, Tasha was working a standard 9-to-5 job and earning her own honest paycheck. She stopped attending the superficial charity galas and stopped caring about the vicious, empty gossip of the country club women. She focused her entire existence on raising her children with authentic, solid values. She taught them that a person is measured entirely by their character and their honesty, not by the brand of their shoes or the inflated balance of their bank account. She completely abandoned the toxic elite mindset that her mother Vivian had violently drilled into her head since childhood. Tasha called me once from her new office desk to thank me for forcing her to finally open her eyes to the truth. She told me she was exhausted from working full-time, but she had never slept better in her entire life. She was finally free from the crushing, suffocating weight of the family lies. While they were desperately adjusting to their completely new lives, I was busy building my empire. I had successfully dismantled a predatory real estate syndicate and put two highly dangerous white-collar criminals behind thick iron bars. I had protected my own peace and fiercely secured my freedom. But the federal government was not quite finished with me yet. It was a crisp, bright Tuesday morning when I walked out to the secure metal mailbox at the end of my long driveway. I pulled out a stack of standard junk mail and stopped dead in my tracks. Sandwiched right between a few boring utility bills was a thick premium paper envelope marked with the official majestic seal of the United States Department of the Treasury. My heart did a slow, deliberate pounding in my chest. I knew exactly what this was. When I first gathered the corporate tax returns, the offshore routing numbers, and the red leather ledgers, I did not just hand them over to the federal authorities out of sheer spite. I filed everything meticulously under the highly secretive federal whistleblower program. The law is incredibly clear and binding on this specific matter. Any individual who provides actionable original information that leads to a successful federal prosecution and the recovery of stolen funds is legally entitled to a mandatory percentage of the recovered assets. Marcus and Liam had stolen tens of millions of dollars from hard-working innocent families across the entire city. The federal tactical teams had successfully seized and quickly liquidated their entire real estate portfolio to pay out restitution based entirely on my detailed forensic accounting work. The government owed me my official cut. I walked back inside my quiet, pristine house and set the mail down on the cold marble kitchen counter. I stared at the heavy official envelope for a long, breathless moment. This was not a pitiful alimony check. This was not a desperate divorce settlement, negotiated with a cheating, narcissistic husband. This was cold, hard, undeniable financial compensation for my absolute brilliance and my calculated bravery. I picked up a sharp silver letter opener and sliced cleanly through the thick official paper. I pulled out the heavy government document. Attached to the very front page was a certified treasury check printed clearly with my exact full legal name. I slowly lowered my eyes to the bold black numbers printed proudly across the center of the check. The amount was absolutely staggering. It was $8,500,000. I did not rush out to buy a fleet of exotic sports cars. I did not purchase a sprawling mega mansion in the suburbs to replace the one Marcus had lost. I did not blow the massive whistleblower check on designer couture or frivolous luxury vacations. I knew better. I knew exactly how fragile the illusion of wealth truly was because I had just spent months meticulously tearing it completely down. Instead of feeding the exact same toxic system that Vivian had worshipped, I decided to build a fortress. I took a significant portion of the $8.5 million and leased a premium top-floor office suite right in the beating heart of Midtown Atlanta. The space featured towering floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the very skyline Marcus had desperately tried to conquer through fraud. I hired a team of top-tier commercial interior designers to strip away the old corporate carpeting and install gleaming polished concrete floors and sleek modern glass walls. The office did not scream old money or pretentious country club elitism. It projected absolute cold, undeniable authority. I stood in the center of the expansive reception area as the contractors installed the massive brushed steel lettering on the wall behind the front desk. J. Vanguard Financial Forensics. It was an elite boutique agency specializing exclusively in two very specific, extremely high-demand areas of practice: uncovering complex corporate fraud and protecting vulnerable spouses from financial abuse in high-asset divorces. I was no longer just an accountant filing paperwork for arrogant developers. I was the absolute top predator in the financial food chain. I had dismantled a multi-million-dollar syndicate and put two prominent white-collar criminals in federal prison. My reputation preceded me. The whispers circulating through the elite social circles of Atlanta were no longer about the barren working-class wife of Marcus. The whispers were entirely about the brilliant, ruthless woman who had engineered his total destruction. I did not even have to spend a single dime on advertising or marketing campaigns. The phone lines at J. Vanguard Financial Forensics began ringing off the hook before the paint on the walls was even dry. My very first official client walked through my glass doors on a rainy Tuesday morning. She was a prominent local television anchor married to a notoriously aggressive sports agent. She sat trembling in the leather chair across from my desk. She explained that she suspected her husband was secretly moving massive portions of their marital assets into untraceable offshore cryptocurrency wallets right before filing for divorce. Her high-priced divorce attorney had told her it was too complicated to prove and advised her to accept a lowball settlement just to avoid a messy public trial. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my desk. I looked at the terrified woman sitting across from me, and I recognized that exact same look of desperation I had seen in Tasha when she realized her entire life was a lie. "I will take the case," I told the anchor, my voice steady and reassuring. "And we are not going to accept a lowball settlement. We are going to freeze every single digital wallet he owns by Friday morning." And we did exactly that. I unleashed my custom tracking algorithms and traced the stolen marital assets through 3 different shell companies and 2 international cryptocurrency exchanges. By Thursday afternoon, we hit her husband with a massive forensic injunction, completely paralyzing his entire financial operation. He was forced to the negotiating table, begging for a quiet settlement that awarded my client exactly what she was legally owed. Word spread through the affluent neighborhoods of Buckhead and Midtown like absolute wildfire. Women across the high society of Atlanta, who were previously trapped in miserable marriages by wealthy, manipulative husbands, suddenly realized they had a powerful weapon at their disposal. They realized they did not have to silently accept financial abuse. They flocked to my agency in droves. They brought me their suspicious tax returns, their confusing corporate structures, and their lingering doubts. I became the absolute worst nightmare for every corrupt, arrogant husband in the metropolitan area. The elite men who used to sneer at me at Sunday brunches were now terrified to hear my name mentioned in a divorce mediation. I built a highly specialized team of aggressive analysts and aggressive investigators. We cracked open complex trust funds. We exposed hidden real estate portfolios. We tracked down offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and the Bahamas. We leveled the playing field for women who had been systemically silenced by financial intimidation. I was not just running a highly profitable business. I was dismantling the very power structures that allowed men like Marcus and Liam to thrive. I walked into my private corner office late one Friday evening after my staff had all gone home for the weekend. The city lights of Atlanta were just beginning to turn on, glowing brightly against the darkening sky. I poured myself a glass of vintage sparkling water and walked over to the massive window. I looked out over the sprawling city, thinking about the incredible, chaotic journey of the past year. I thought about the anniversary dinner at the restaurant. I thought about the fake pregnancy, the stolen ledgers, the federal trial, and the total collapse of the elite dynasty. I thought about Vivian sitting alone in her tiny, cramped apartment and Marcus rotting away in a federal cell. They had tried to completely break my spirit. They had tried to frame me for their crimes and steal my future. They wanted to reduce me to nothing more than a pathetic footnote in their arrogant story. But I had refused to play the victim. I had taken their cruelty, their lies, and their stolen money, and I had weaponized it all against them. I sat down at my massive custom mahogany desk and ran my hand over the smooth, polished wood. I smiled a deep, genuine smile of absolute satisfaction. I realized in that quiet, triumphant moment that my greatest weapon had never been my anger or my desire for revenge. My greatest weapon was my own brilliant, undeniable mind. 6 months later, that exact same brilliant, undeniable mind designed the ultimate celebration of my absolute victory. I hosted the official launch party for my forensic accounting firm right in the center of my premium Midtown office suite. The atmosphere was completely different from the suffocating, pretentious charity galas my former mother-in-law used to host. There was absolutely no fake glamour here. There were no rented diamonds. There were no desperately leveraged bank loans masquerading as generational wealth. The room was filled with authentic, undeniable power. I invited the federal prosecutors who helped me secure the indictments. I invited honest local politicians who actively fought against predatory real estate developers. I invited powerful self-made Black women from across the city of Atlanta who had built their own empires from the ground up. They did not hide behind their husbands. They did not hide behind shell companies. They did not hide behind the fragile illusion of high society. They owned their power outright. Tasha stood near the sleek glass conference room, holding a glass of sparkling water and laughing genuinely with a prominent family court judge. She wore a simple, elegant dress that she purchased with her own hard-earned salary. The heavy, toxic weight of the elite expectations had been completely lifted from her shoulders. She was finally living an honest life. She was finally breathing clean air, miles away from the warmth and laughter of my launch party. The reality of federal justice was grinding away at the men who tried to destroy me. Marcus sat on a hard steel cot inside a maximum security federal penitentiary. The heavy iron doors clanged shut, echoing down the cold concrete block. The bespoke navy suits were completely gone. The silk ties were completely gone. The arrogant, untouchable smirk was completely gone. He wore a stiff, bright orange jumpsuit that scratched against his skin. He stared down at a divided plastic tray, holding a bland, gray, unsalted meal. The man who needed a massive real estate empire to feel significant was now permanently confined to an 8 by 10 concrete box. He had no cell phone. He had no luxury cars. He had no mistresses to manipulate. He had 15 long, agonizing years to sit in absolute silence and think about the exact moment he underestimated his wife. He traded a loyal, brilliant partner for a cheap illusion, and it cost him every single second of his freedom. In a run-down apartment complex on the dangerous outskirts of the city, his mother was serving a different kind of life sentence. Vivian sat entirely alone in the suffocating darkness of her tiny, cramped living room. The relentless noise of the nearby highway rattled her thin, cheap windows. The smell of stale cigarette smoke seeped through the peeling wallpaper. She sat on a highly uncomfortable fold-out couch, clutching a faded, glossy photograph in her trembling hands. It was a picture from a country club gala taken 10 years ago. She traced her fingers over the smiling faces of the elite wealthy women who now pretended they never knew her name. The church leaders had abandoned her. Her sorority sisters had abandoned her. She had willingly handed over the red leather ledgers that locked her own son in a cage just to save herself from prison. But her selfish betrayal had left her with absolutely nothing. She had no legacy. She had no family. She had no future. She was a ghost haunting her own miserable existence. She picked up her cracked cell phone and stared at the blank screen, willing it to ring. It remained perfectly dark and perfectly silent. I walked away from the lively chatter of my launch party and stepped out onto the expansive glass balcony. The warm, humid Atlanta evening air wrapped around me like a comforting embrace. I held a crystal glass of vintage champagne in my hand. The champagne was not bought with stolen construction deposits. The champagne was not bought with laundered money. It was purchased with clean, honest, highly profitable funds. I stepped up to the edge of the glass railing and looked out over the glittering, sprawling skyline of Buckhead in Midtown. The towering skyscrapers pierced the dark night sky, glowing with vibrant neon lights. I watched the headlights of thousands of cars moving like rivers of gold through the city streets. I command this view. I command this skyline. I command my own destiny. I did not secure my place in this city through fraud. I did not secure it through psychological manipulation. I did not secure it by exploiting hardworking, vulnerable families. I commanded my position through pure intellect and unyielding self-respect. I stared at the towering bank buildings where Marcus used to secure his fraudulent loans. I stared at the luxury hotels where Vivian used to host her fake charity events. They were all beneath me now. The family that tried to strip me of my dignity completely failed. They tried to break my spirit and leave me with absolutely nothing on the driveway of that Buckhead estate. They thought I would crumble and surrender to their intimidation. But their sheer arrogance became their absolute undoing. Their unchecked greed became their permanent prison. They handed me the ammunition. They handed me the ledgers. They handed me the absolute keys to the kingdom. I raised my crystal glass to the glowing city lights. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the cold vintage champagne, letting the crisp bubbles dance across my tongue. I smiled a deep, triumphant smile as the bright orange sun set perfectly over the Atlanta skyline, casting a brilliant golden hour glow across my brand new empire. The revenge was not just sweet, it was exquisitely profitable. The greatest weapon against toxic people is not a loud argument, but quiet preparation and financial independence. When manipulative family members try to tear you down, they rely on your emotional reaction to maintain control. This story proves that true power comes from knowing your worth and securing your own assets behind the scenes. Never let anyone convince you that you are less than what you are. Build your own empire so when their lies shatter, you hold the keys to your freedom. Let me know in the comments how you protect your peace and hit subscribe for more stories.